November 7, 1944. France. German officers scanned the horizon, confident they would crush the enemy. They had been told Black American tankers were incapable of modern war. Too slow, too unskilled, too weak. But through the mist, Sherman's advanced with flawless precision. Commands cut sharp through the air. German defenses collapsed in hours. What fell that day was not only a line of fortifications, but an ideology built on lies. For 183 days without relief, the 761st Tank Battalion, the Black Panthers, fought across Europe. Each mile gained, each town seized, tore another piece from the myth of racial superiority. This is the untold story of the Black Panthers, the tankers who fought two wars at once, one against Hitler's armies abroad, and another against racism at home. The Germans called them inferior. History remembers them as relentless. For 183 days of unbroken combat, the Black Panthers proved that courage has no color and endurance knows no boundary. They shattered Nazi ideology abroad and exposed prejudice at home. If this story moved you, share it. Subscribe to join us as we uncover more untold chapters of history where truth destroys myth and courage rewrites the record. When the United States entered the Second World War, it carried segregation with it. Black men could volunteer. They could be drafted. They could wear the uniform, but most would be ordered to cook, to clean, to haul supplies. The rifle and the tank were reserved for others. Military leaders insisted that black soldiers lacked the discipline for combat. Reports argued they were unsuited for modern machines. Entire careers had been built on this prejudice, reinforced by law and custom at home. Tanks, the cutting edge of mechanized war, were considered far beyond their reach, yet pressure grew. Black newspapers demanded change. Civil rights leaders lobbied Washington. Politicians realized they could not ask millions of Black Americans to support the war effort while denying them the right to fight. The War Department yielded. The 761st Tank Battalion was activated in 1942. It was not a triumph of equality. It was a reluctant concession. The unit was described as an experiment. Few in authority expected it to succeed. Some believed its very existence would prove them right, that black soldiers could not master complex tactics or command armored vehicles in battle. For the men who reported to training, the stakes were heavier than for any other unit. They were not simply preparing to fight the Axis. They were preparing to fight an idea. Every movement in the turret, every order on the radio, every gunnery score was judged against prejudice, not against peers. A single mistake could be used as evidence to condemn an entire race as unfit for combat. The men understood this. They carried the weight with them into every drill and every maneuver. They trained longer, harder, and under more scrutiny than others. What began as an experiment would grow into one of the most extraordinary records of the entire war, and the very system that had doubted them would be forced to acknowledge it. The 761st began at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, in April 1942. The men who arrived came from every corner of America. Farmhands, factory workers, students, laborers. Some had mechanical skill. Some had never seen a tank in their lives, but they all carried the same burden, to prove themselves in a system waiting for them to fail. Inside the M5 Stuart, heat rose like a furnace. Steel walls trapped the Louisiana sun until the air burned at 120 degrees. Sweat poured into eyes, onto controls, into the ammunition racks. The work was brutal, but the stakes were clear. They could not afford mistakes. Every misfire, every stalled engine, every poor maneuver would be noted as proof of racial inferiority. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates, their commanding officer, understood this reality. He was white, but he believed in his men. He knew that prejudice in Washington and at Army headquarters would only yield to one thing: undeniable performance. So he drove them harder than most units. Long days of gunnery, endless radio drills until orders sounded like music, maintenance checks until crews could rebuild a tank track in the dark. He demanded perfection because he knew that anything less would be used against them. Tank crews learned quickly that survival depended on unity. A commander could not hesitate. A gunner could not miss. A loader could not falter under pressure. A driver had to guide 30 tons of steel across mud and rivers while keeping the engine alive. 5 men, 1 machine, functioning as a single organism. By late 1942, they moved with precision that rivaled any white armored battalion. Observers who watched their exercises recorded the results with unease. Their gunnery scores were high. Their discipline was flawless, their maintenance records exemplary. On paper, they were ready for war. But war did not come. Other battalions shipped out to North Africa and Italy. The 761st stayed behind. Their excellence was acknowledged but unused. They remained in training month after month, year after year. The frustration grew. They had joined to fight fascism, yet they were sidelined by the very prejudice they were preparing to destroy. They trained harder, but each achievement only sharpened the irony. The men of the 761st were ready for combat long before their country was ready to let them prove it. In September 1943, the 761st was moved to Fort Hood, Texas. Here they left the light Stuart behind and climbed into the M4 Sherman, the backbone of American armored forces. 30 tons of steel, a 75mm main gun later upgraded to 76. Better armor, greater power. The machine they had waited for. Training grew even harsher. Crews drilled every maneuver until it was instinct. How to cross open ground under fire. How to coordinate with infantry. How to destroy fortified buildings. The men knew these lessons would mean life or death when the day finally came. But outside the base, the world reminded them where they stood. Fort Hood sat deep in Jim Crow, Texas. Segregated restaurants, segregated theaters, segregated buses. Off-duty soldiers in uniform were denied service, refused seats, threatened by police. The contradiction cut deep. They were preparing to fight for democracy abroad while being denied basic dignity at home. Even on base, the lines were drawn. Separate barracks, separate facilities, separate movie houses. Black soldiers trained, ate, and slept apart from white soldiers they might one day be called to save. The message was clear. Skill did not erase the color line. In July 1944, the tension reached a breaking point. A young officer, Second Lieutenant Jack Roosevelt Robinson, boarded a bus on base. The driver ordered him to the back. Robinson refused. Military police arrested him. Though later acquitted, the incident cost him his place with the 761st. History would remember him for breaking baseball's color barrier, but before that, he had stood with the Black Panthers. His departure left a scar. The men trained harder still, driving their Shermans across Texas plains while knowing that at the end of the day, they returned to a segregated world. They were ready for war, but war still would not take them. The months dragged on. The paradox grew sharper. They were being shaped into one of the Army's best armored battalions, while their own country treated them as second-class citizens. In the summer of 1944, after more than 2 years of waiting, the orders finally came. The 761st Tank Battalion was shipping out. The men boarded the troop ship Esperance Bay in New York Harbor. 712 soldiers? Years of training, years of frustration. At last, they were headed to war. The crossing was cramped and miserable. Bunks stacked 4 high in airless holds. Seasickness rolled through the ship as waves hammered the Atlantic. But spirits were high. Every man knew this was the moment they had been denied for too long. In England, they trained on the latest model Shermans, the M4A3 with the 76mm gun. Stronger armor, more power. The weapon they would soon turn against German Panthers and Tigers. They drilled quickly, familiarizing themselves with the new systems.
Preparing for the storm ahead. On October 10, 1944,
the 761st came ashore at Omaha Beach, 4 months after D-Day. The sand was quiet now, but the wreckage of June still scarred the shore. Burned-out vehicles, shattered bunkers, graves marked in rows. The men knew the cost of the path they were stepping onto. Weeks later, they were ordered east toward the German border, attached to General George S. Patton's Third Army. Patton was a man of contradictions, flamboyant, ruthless, driven by glory. He was also one of the few commanders willing to take a chance on the 761st. He needed fighters, and he believed they could deliver. When he addressed them, his words cut with typical blunt force. He told them they were the first black tank battalion to fight in the American Army. He told them he expected them to prove themselves. He told them the world was watching, their race was watching, and that failure would shame them all. He told them not to let him down, not to let America down, not to let themselves down. The message was clear. They were not just another battalion. They were on trial. Their success or failure would echo far beyond the battlefield. The men of the 761st understood, and they were ready. November 7, 1944. The morning was cold, the air thick with mist. The 761st Tank Battalion rolled toward its first combat. Their target was the German-held town of Morville-les-Vicq in northeastern France. American infantry had tried before and failed. Now the Black Panthers would lead. B Company spearheaded the attack. The first Sherman entered the narrow streets. A German soldier fired a Panzerfaust from a window. The rocket slammed into the tank's flank, crippling it and blocking the road. German fire converged. The crew dragged the wounded clear, then fought back with rifles and the tank's remaining weapons until reinforcements pushed through. Under fire, they refused to yield. Elsewhere, Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers faced a mined roadblock. Mortar shells burst around him. Machine gun fire pinned the infantry in place. Without hesitation, Rivers climbed from his tank, attached a cable under fire, and hauled the obstacle clear. The column advanced. The infantry broke free. For this act of fearless leadership, Rivers would receive the Silver Star. By nightfall, Morville-les-Vicq was in American hands. The cost was high. Dead and wounded littered the streets, but the objective was taken. The men of the 761st had proven themselves in their first day of combat, not as an experiment, and not as tokens, as tankers who fought and won. German prisoners captured in the battle revealed something unexpected. They admitted they had been told that Black Americans were incapable of modern warfare. They had been assured that these soldiers would break. Instead, they had encountered discipline, precision, and courage that equaled or surpassed their own. The propaganda collapsed in the rubble of Morville-les-Vicq. In the following days, the battalion pressed on. Vic-sur-Seille, Château-Salins, Dieuze. Each town taken added weight to the truth. The Black Panthers were not inferior. They were professionals, and they were just getting started. Only days after Morville-les-Vicq, the 761st pressed deeper into northeastern France. The fighting grew harder, the resistance more desperate. In this crucible, one man became the embodiment of the battalion's spirit. Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers. On November 16th, near the village of Gebling, Rivers's Sherman struck a mine at a railroad crossing. The explosion ripped through the steel. Shrapnel tore into his leg, cutting it open from knee to thigh. Medics told him he had what they called a $1 million wound. He could go home. He had earned it. Rivers refused. He would not take morphine because he feared it would cloud his judgment. He would not accept evacuation because his men needed him. Bandaged and bleeding, fever burning, he climbed into another Sherman and took command. Through November 17th and 18th, he continued to lead. His legs swelled grotesquely, infection set in, but he stayed in his tank, directing fire, urging his men forward. He refused every order to leave. His captain begged him to withdraw. Rivers' reply was simple. "You know better than that, Captain. This is going to be tough." On the morning of November 19th, his company advanced again. German anti-tank guns opened fire from hidden positions. The Americans were caught in the open. Rivers saw the danger. He ordered his tank forward to draw the fire, covering the withdrawal of the others. Enemy rounds slammed into his Sherman. One pierced the turret. The tank erupted in flame. Rivers was killed instantly, along with 2 of his crew. He had fought for 3 days with a wound that should have ended his life on the first. He had refused safety, refused comfort, refused even morphine, so that his men could continue the fight. His sacrifice allowed his company to survive and push on. Decades later, in 1997, Rivers would be awarded the Medal of Honor. But for the men who served beside him, recognition was never in doubt. In those desperate days of November 1944, he had become the heart of the battalion. His courage carried them forward. December 1944. Germany struck back in the Ardennes, launching the Battle of the Bulge. The 761st was rushed north into the snowbound chaos. Roads clogged with refugees and retreating soldiers. The weather was brutal, engines froze, ammunition jammed. Still, the Black Panthers rolled forward. Their fiercest fight came at Tillet, Belgium. German SS veterans defended with mines, anti-tank guns, and fortified houses. Snow blinded vision. Ice turned every road into a trap. Axis radio broadcasts targeted the 761st directly, urging them to abandon white officers and return home. The men ignored the lies. They fought on. Shermans battled street by street. Losses were heavy, but the Germans broke. When prisoners learned they had been defeated by black tankers, disbelief spread through their ranks. Nazi propaganda had promised them inferiors. Reality had delivered professionals. The victory at Tillet came at terrible cost, but it secured a vital position in the Ardennes and proved again that the 761st could endure any trial. Through snow, fire, and prejudice, They showed that determination and discipline mattered more than the lies of ideology. By early 1945, the German frontier loomed. Across it stretched the West Wall, known to the Allies as the Siegfried Line. Miles of bunkers, pillboxes, and tank traps. Concrete teeth jutted from the ground. Mines littered the approaches. It was designed to bleed any attacker dry. The 761st was ordered forward. Engineers crawled ahead to probe for mines under covering fire. Infantry hugged the ground, advancing in the wake of tanks. Shermans blasted bunkers, knocking holes through fortified walls. Artillery shook the earth, pounding strong points that refused to yield. Every yard gained was paid for in sweat and steel. For 4 relentless days in March, the Black Panthers battered their way through the defenses near Rhein-Durkheim. German units threw everything into the fight: infantry, artillery, even hastily armed militia. Still, the 761st pressed on. By the time the line cracked, they had inflicted thousands of casualties and taken over 3,000 prisoners. What had begun as an experiment in 1942 now stood as one of the most experienced armored battalions in Patton's Third Army. The same army that once doubted them now relied on them to punch holes in Germany's strongest defenses. Skill, discipline, and courage had become their answer to every doubt and every prejudice. With the Siegfried Line shattered, the path into Germany opened. The Rhine River was the last great natural barrier. In late March 1945, the 761st crossed on pontoon bridges built under fire. Columns of armor streamed eastward, engines roaring, bridging units guiding them across the cold, fast water. Once over, the Black Panthers drove deep into the heart of the Reich. They joined the encirclement of the Ruhr Pocket, Germany's industrial center. Town after town fell in quick succession. Streets littered with burned trucks, abandoned half-tracks, and shattered artillery testified to the enemy's collapse. The pace was exhausting, but the momentum was unstoppable. The 761st pursued, cutting off retreat, breaking resistance, keeping German forces on the run. April carried them south toward Austria. Resistance crumbled. Villages surrendered at the sight of Shermans on the horizon. Still, there were pockets of fierce fighting. The battalion pressed through, clearing positions, capturing prisoners, and leaving behind the wreckage of a dying army. On April 26th, near Steyr, Austria, the 761st met Soviet armored forces pushing west. The two armies, one from the east, one from the west, clasped hands in the ruins of the Reich. The war in Europe had only days left. For the Black Panthers, it was a moment heavy with meaning. They had fought across 6 countries, from France to Austria, without relief. Now they stood on the frontier of victory. From November 7, 1944 to May 8, 1945, the 761st Tank Battalion fought without pause. 183 consecutive days in combat. No rotation home, no relief, no rest beyond what they could steal between missions. The toll was immense. 3 officers and 31 enlisted men were killed. More than 200 were wounded. Replacements arrived straight from training. Unfamiliar faces dropped into veteran crews. Mechanics worked through the night under shell fire, cannibalizing wrecks to keep Shermans moving. Every man carried fatigue, but every man kept fighting. They liberated over 30 towns. They fought across 6 nations. They participated in 4 major campaigns: northern France, the Rhineland, the Ardennes, and Central Europe. Their combat actions inflicted an estimated 130,000 German casualties when combined with the infantry and artillery they supported. These were not the statistics of an experiment. They were the statistics of a hardened professional battalion. Recognition came slowly. In 1978, more than 3 decades after the guns fell silent, President Jimmy Carter awarded the 761st the Presidential Unit Citation for extraordinary heroism. Individual soldiers earned Silver Stars, Bronze Stars, and nearly 300 Purple Hearts. One name rose above all: Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers, finally awarded the Medal of Honor in 1997. Belated honors, but honors nonetheless. The record was clear. No American armored unit fought longer without relief. The Black Panthers had entered combat under suspicion and prejudice. They emerged with one of the most remarkable records of the war. When victory in Europe was declared, celebrations swept across the Allied nations. But for the men of the 761st, returning home was not triumph. It was a return to the same prejudice they had left behind. They stepped off trains in uniform, medals on their chests, yet many were barred from restaurants. Hotels refused them rooms. Segregated buses ordered them to the back. Some who had commanded tanks in combat were offered only menial work. They had faced Nazi armor and broken the Siegfried Line, yet they were treated as second-class citizens in the country they had defended. Still, the war had changed them. The discipline, courage, and endurance they had proven under fire carried into civilian life. Many used the GI Bill to attend universities that once seemed out of reach. They became doctors, teachers, lawyers, engineers. Others built businesses, started families, and carried their experience into community leadership. They had fought one war with Shermans and steel, and they were ready to fight another with education and determination. For many, the contradiction was impossible to ignore. They had given everything to a nation that demanded their loyalty but still denied their equality. Their voices joined the rising tide of the civil rights movement. They carried with them not only anger at injustice, but the unshakable proof of what they had accomplished in war. Proof that prejudice had no foundation. Proof that, given the chance, they had matched any unit in the world. The story of the 761st Tank Battalion did not end with the war. Their combat record became evidence in a larger battle, the fight to change America itself. Commanders who once doubted them now submitted reports that praised their discipline and effectiveness. White soldiers who had fought alongside them returned home with a different understanding, testifying to their skill and courage. Civil rights leaders seized on these facts. They asked a question the nation could no longer ignore. If black soldiers could fight and win against the most powerful army in Europe, how could they be denied equality at home? In 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 91981, mandating the desegregation of the United States Armed Forces. The order cited equality of treatment and opportunity for all, regardless of race. Behind those words stood the proof written in the battlefields of France, Belgium, Germany, and Austria, the proof of the 761st. Their influence reached beyond the military. Veterans of the battalion became educators, activists, and professionals. They spoke of what they had endured, both in Europe and in America. They reminded the nation that they had fought two wars, one against Hitler's armies abroad and another against the weight of racism at home. Their testimony strengthened the foundations of the civil rights movement that would follow. The legacy of the 761st Tank Battalion was not only tactical, it was moral. They had shown that segregation was not just unjust, it was inefficient, wasteful, and self-defeating. Integrated units, born out of necessity and proven by sacrifice, would define the future of the American military. Decades after the war, the memory of the 761st was carved into stone. At Fort Cavazos, Texas, where they had once trained under the shadow of Jim Crow, a monument now stands. 4 black granite tablets surround a marble sculpture of a kneeling tanker, head bowed, rifle in hand. The inscription recalls their record, 183 consecutive days of combat without relief. In 1978, the Presidential Unit Citation finally recognized their valor. In 1997, the Medal of Honor was awarded to Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers. These honors came late, but they came because the truth could not be buried forever. The Black Panthers of the 761st fought 2 wars, one against Nazi Germany's armies across Europe, another against the prejudice of their own country. They won both through relentless skill, discipline, and courage. The Germans called them inferior. History remembers them as relentless. Each battle they fought, each town they liberated, each mile they advanced was proof hammered into history. Proof that courage has no color. Proof that excellence emerges when barriers fall. Proof that truth, once revealed, cannot be silenced. The 761st Tank Battalion did more than fight a war. They rewrote what America believed possible. Their story endures because it was earned in blood, fire, and unbroken resolve. If the story of the Black Panthers moved you, share it. Let others know what was once nearly forgotten. Subscribe to join us as we uncover more untold chapters of history, where truth destroys myth and courage rewrites the record. Together, we ensure these voices are never silenced again.